Hi, everyone. This is the Sonical.ly podcast where music creators educate music creators. I'm Elmo, and today we have an amazing guest today. His name is Richard Devine, and he is an Atlanta-based electronic musician and sound designer. He is recognized for producing a layered and heavily processed sound, combining influences from glitch music to old and modern electronic music. As a sound designer, Richard has designed sound patches for Propellerhead's Reason, Native Instruments' Absinthe, Reactor, Battery, Massive, and award-winning Animoog app. Along with designing sounds for these software companies, Richard has also created his own sample library through Sony called the Electronic Music Manuscript, a Richard Devine collection. As a producer and performer, he continues to release albums and tour all over the world. And finally, he has also scored commercials for Nike, Touchstone Pictures, and games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Doom. So without further ado, we would like to welcome the legend, the genius, Richard Devine, to the Sonical.ly podcast. Let's give him a round of applause and give him a warm welcome. Welcome, Richard, to the Sonical.ly podcast. We are so honored to have you on the show today. And I have been looking forward to this interview for a while because starting my music career, I was an avid Propellerhead user. I've seen your name around the sound design sphere and on the internet sphere. So I'm so honored to have you, and thank you once again for taking the time to talk to me today.
No problem. Yeah, no, it's funny. I should have, when you were reading off the bio, I should have updated that because a lot of that information is probably 20 years old. And like, I think I updated my bio like maybe a year or two ago because I'd been working on so many projects that I forgot about. I was like, oh, I worked for Novation. I worked for Digidesign. Oh, I worked for Solid State Logic. I worked for Eventide. I worked with literally hundreds of companies on projects that were in the audio industry, whether they were designing sounds for plugins or sample libraries for Native Instruments. You know, I worked on many of their products, from the context expansion libraries to all the Machina or Machine, however they want to call it, but I did a lot of their expansion packs, and as well as the most recently worked on a lot of the Massive X expansion packs, designing those because I was on the original design team for Massive and FM7, Battery 2, from early versions, Absinthe 2, 3, 4, up to 5, which I think they're discontinuing from the current lineup, which is unfortunate because I'm really close friends with Brian, Rhizomatic Software, who is a great close friend of mine, and I was one of the first sound designers to work in Absinthe back in the day. So I have a very long, 23-year-long history with Native Instruments as one of their senior sound designers and content producers. So I worked on many hundreds of projects spanning from Reactor instruments to Battery to you name it. We did the Electronics Volume Instruments to Volume 1 and 2 to it was just hundreds of projects I worked on, but I learned a lot working with them. They're a great company. They were awesome, and they really were kind of like one of the first companies to kind of get my foot in the door, and it was kind of all by accident.
And go back to the beginnings of your musical journey. Did you grow up with music in your life?
I did. My mother, being the courageous Korean crazy mom I had.
Oh, wait a second. Sorry, you're Korean? You're half Korean?
Yes, sir. Yep. 안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
Yeah.
I had no idea. You know, most of my career was in K-pop music, so
wow.
Yeah, with the last name and with the aesthetic of Richard Devine, I had no idea that you're half Korean. So,
well, yeah, it's like my dad. My dad's Irish. He's half Hungarian, Irish. There's a lot of it's a weird mixture. And then my mom is from Southern Korea. She's from Daegu.
Mm.
And actually, before the pandemic, I played my first show in Seoul at a very cool festival with Ryojita. Kawak. He played with me. Let me see here. Yeah, Kawasaki Kawakoa. Yeah, Kawasaki Kawa is a Japanese. He's a sound installation artist who works with Max MSP, as well as many other installation pieces. And he was the other headlining act as well as me at this festival. And the festival was thrown at a museum, a new modern art museum that had a large space to downstairs where they had the actual event at. And I took my mom with me. I flew her to South Korea with me, and I was like, hey, let's go visit our relatives that I've never got to meet. And I would love for my mom to give me a tour of Korea, and our uncles came out, and it was just amazing. I got to eat all my favorite foods, go to all the Galbi barbecue houses, and it was just amazing. It was an amazing time. I had a lovely time with my mom, getting to know her family and learn a lot about my history and where my that side of my family was from, and getting to connect with those people, and just really going to the country to kind of get a feeling of hey, this is part of me. I come from this, I want to know more about this. I want to experience the country. And not only that, but the most exciting thing was that I didn't know I even had fans in Korea. I just didn't know. So this booking agency booked me to play, and I'll never forget my mom, who's a very hard, stubborn woman, and she's very strict, and she looks at my career. She knows that I've been very successful. She's very happy now. Now I'm working for Apple. I was working for Google before, so I worked on very big projects, and made to her, making money is really important. To me, being happy and doing what I love to do is more important. But if you can find the balance of, artistically expressing yourself and making art that you love and that other people's love, I think that's ultimately the biggest goal. I'm not in it really to be rich or to be famous or anything like that. I just the principle I always go back to is just inspiring people. I always want to inspire others, and I think that's ultimately the most important thing. So that might not be in line with my mother's expectations of what she wants me to be doing, but we know how Korean mothers are. They can be very tough, and my mom's always like, I wanted you to be a doctor. You would have been a good doctor or a lawyer, or your cousin, she's a maxillofacial surgeon, and it's always about money and how much money they made and materialistic things. And I was like, well, I'm just not like that, Mom. I'm more about art and how art affects people and their experiences with art, whether that they have these emotional connections with that. I think there's something really beautiful about that, the communication between creating something and then the experience that the person has, whether that's a memory when they hear the song or music, or there's something to me that's really profound about that. Even at the level of being a sound designer, I feel that even when you design sounds, which I do for many companies and different technologies, that you create something that someone else takes and then they make something completely different with it. They hear it in a different way. They perceive it in a different way. And then because of that, they'll use that sound in a context that you would have never thought to use that sound in. And that to me is always such an intriguing, interesting aspect of what is really a lot of my job these days, and I always get a really big kick out of seeing what people do with these creations and things that I've created as sort of these inspirational springboards that can kind of give people ideas. And I think that to me, the ultimate is the inspiration that you can provide to these people, because that's really it's the spark that gets people wanting to make something and to create something, whether it's music or write a song or create a sound or just experiment with a new concept that's exciting to them, that may help them or understand a concept better that may be complicated at first. There's a lot of, especially with synthesis and stuff, I work heavily with digital and analog synthesis systems here, which can some of them can be simple and some of them are quite complex to understand. And it just takes time to understand these principles and the architecture of how some of these systems work and how they interact with each other. And it's almost kind of like making music with I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, I work with some machines that are very cumbersome and they're very difficult to use, but they get really interesting sounds. So it's worth it to actually put the time in, but it can be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So your mom introducing you, I guess, would you define her as a tiger mom and introducing you to like traditional music lessons with piano, violin, or something like that, where you were essentially learning other people's music and playing it to how your teacher wanted you to play it, and if you didn't play it in that way, he'd be very strict and yell at you, or maybe even hit your hand or something like that.
You hit the nail on the head. That was exactly what it was for me. Yes.
Yeah, where there really is no creativity in that process. So how did you go from those lessons to discovering, DJing and being more creative with the process?
It's a very, very good question. So when I started taking piano lessons, I went through several piano teachers, right? So the goal for me, or not actually for my mom, more or less, it was really more for her at the time. She wanted to be more well-rounded, and for me and my brother to have these skills to play piano and do these recitals. She wanted to be proud and videotape the performances and stuff, It wasn't until my last piano teacher that I met. He's from Europe. I think he was from Budapest. Really, really great piano teacher. Who kind of asked me this really profound question, And it really, really made me think about things differently. He's like, "So why are you taking piano lessons?" That was the first thing he said to me in our first lesson. I go, "Because my mom's making me take these?" And he looks at me and goes, "You shouldn't be taking these lessons because your mom wants you to take these. You should be taking these because you want to take these. And that you are getting something from this, like some emotional response, some release. Maybe it's just it's something to get away from everyday life. Maybe it's a therapeutic thing. Music can be many, many, many things to different people. An escape, it can be, therapy for people. It's therapy for me. If I work on music, I feel like I can go in the studio for hours, and it's almost like painting. If I were just like oil painting or watercolor painting, I was just creating something. You just get in this mindset where you're just creating. You're not really thinking about things in the other world. You're just focusing on the work that you're working on, and it can kind of take you out of like your everyday realities of life for just maybe a short moment of time when you're working on that piece. And music almost has the same effect. And you're still dealing with the principles of design, using repetition, texture, color, all the same things that apply in the visual art world can be also directly applied into the audio world. So I had just, made the decision early on that I was like, I'm going to investigate this more because it's doing something for me. I really, really like what it does to me psychologically, like it's a nice escape. And at the same time, it's like there's this fun sort of playful exploratory aspect to discovering new sounds and trying to learn how to create new sounds that have never been heard before. I've always been sort of intrigued on this mission to kind of like look at new technologies, look at new systems that can create, whether they're AI based or machine learning based, or they're using some new form of technology to come up with new ideas, whether that's in the applications of sound design or music composition. extremely fascinated with all this. This is all things that I'm really interested in, and like where all the directions are going in. So, but yeah, it was tricky. Yeah, with my mom, like you said in the beginning, she wanted me to take piano lessons because it was something that she wanted. And it wasn't necessarily something that I wasn't really interested in at the time because, I was 9, 10 years old. I was like, I'd rather go BMX biking, go skateboarding at the skate park and, go catch poisonous snakes in the creek. I was really interested in piano. I was kind of at the age where I was really appreciating it. And then it wasn't until my last piano teacher when he profoundly asked me that question, why are you doing this? I was like, well, I'm doing it because my mom is making me do it. Like, you should be doing this because you love it, and there's something that it gives back to you. It should give you something back. You should be getting something back. It's not a one-way street when it comes to music. When you're performing music, it brings you something. You get emotional feedback that speaks to you, speaks to your soul, or whatever you want to say, or heart, or whatever. And you get the sensation of creating something that other people can experience, that same feeling, that emotion that you're trying to convey with this music, these musical structures, however you're devising them. And it's communication. It's a form of communication that really is it's very powerful communication, because when you're working with primarily instrumental music, a person in India could hear the track, a person in Afghanistan, China, it doesn't matter where they are in the world, they could still experience that emotion and the feeling and the idea and the concepts that you're putting into this piece of music. I found that compelling. I was like, I didn't even think about that. I was just making music so that I would pass the recitals that my mom was recording on her video camera so that she could be proud of her son. But then it dawned on me. I was like, well, let me look at the big picture down the road. Say I keep going along with this and then I start making my own music. What would my goals be? Like, who would the target audience be? I first would have to find what it is that the kind of music that I make, what it is about me is going to make me unique and different from other artists. I just didn't want to be just another, how do they call them? There's a term for the, just the typical, like techno or EDM DJs where they're like a dime a dozen. They're all following the same fads, playing all the same tracks, just tracking Beatport's top 10 playlist, and then, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what your goal is, you can do that. I just didn't want to be one of those people. I was always one of those people that really, really wanted to always move forward with like the latest technologies and really, really pushing things to like the edge, like right up to that limit to where it's almost like, what is this guy doing?
I guess the next question that I have is like, in order to get to that place where you have explored sound to those depths and where you can pick up, where people are companies, innovative companies are now knocking on your door saying, please help us design these products. And like for the layperson, for the normal person, when it comes to music itself, like most people listen to a song as a whole, right? And as a producer, as a composer, I guess it's your job to break those sonics down to its core element. And I think that takes a certain amount of, like you said, desire and sometimes obsession to really listen that deeply. I guess, my question is, when did you realize that your ears or like sonics and sound were the thing for you, and that you listen to sonics in a different way than other people?
It's a good question. I'd say when I was 17 years old, I was buying a lot of records at the time because I was DJing at the local clubs and stuff. And I was always looking for really obscure stuff. I was always interested in some of the more challenging music. I always liked music that it kind of made you question things. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't always interested in the typical mainstream pop music, or, I was perplexed by artists that would do things that just didn't make sense to me. And I was always more intrigued by that. And I remember I inherited a record collection from my friend Tim Adams, who was a synthesizer tech here in Atlanta, who I would bring all my broken analog synthesizers I'd buy in these pawn shops, and I'd be like, "I'm sorry, man, I bought another one, and I don't know what's wrong with it." And I got to be really good friends with him. He would fix a lot of my synths, and he at that current time was moving out of his apartment, so he had a bunch of records. He was getting rid of about 6 crates of records that he had collected over the lifetime of him collecting vinyl, and I acquired this record collection. He donated it to me, which was very courteous of him, and I just was blown away. I didn't realize that there was so much advanced, interesting music that was happening 20, 30 years before what I was listening to right now. And it was kind of a turning point for me. So in that collection, I heard music from everyone from Herbie Hancock to Morton Subotnick to John Cage to Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. And these were all artists that I had not been familiar with. And I remember sitting at home every night, eating mushrooms, listening to these records on my parents' turntable player in my room, and being like, where in the world are these people getting these ideas? Like, everything I thought about music had been completely just, like, it was like the rug had been pulled out underneath me. I was just like, oh, well, the song always has to have a format. It has to have a BPM. It has to have different sections, the chorus, the break, the drop, all the things that, the intro, the outro. Like, I listened to these records, especially Morton Subotnick's records. I don't know if you had a chance to hear his work, but Morton's work was just astonishing. It was like, didn't follow any of the conventional rules of like, musical composition, and the timbres and everything were so alien. It was almost like you took a bunch of watercolor paint and you just splattered it all over the canvas. And then the colors would bleed into each other, and then you would see things like particles coming up, and that's what his music sounded like. It sounded like this organic, I don't even know how to describe it. It was very organic and unusual, and nothing ever repeated. It was just this, like, I remember when I heard Touch, another album he released on No Such Records, and that record, it was like a 23-minute track, and I remember just listening to that track, just being like, how in the world did he make this? This record was made 20 years ago on technology that was extremely crude, and like, compared to what we're using today, he was creating these extremely, infinitely complex timbres and gestures that were just puzzling to me. It was just like a mystery. So I became extremely intrigued by his work and wanted to study it more and understand what he was using. And I remember looking at the back of the album covers and seeing him working at Cal Arts with the Buchla 200 series system, Don Buchla's early modular 200 series analog systems. And I remember seeing these modular systems. They look like cockpits, with like these lights. Like, I guess the best way I can describe it's kind of like mine over here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it kind of looked like that. So you look at that and you're just like, what in the hell? How do you make music with that? That looks like just a complete mess of just wires and things. And it was the same thing. I looked at the back of the record cover and I was just like, how does create music? How does he, it was just fast. It was just it's something I had to find out for myself. I had to know, I had to research it, I had to understand it and see what it was about this. Cause I'd not heard up until that point. I'd never heard anyone make music like that, and it was a huge turning point for me in my career. And I knew at that point that I wanted to start investing in these type of systems, these open modular based systems to create music, because it seemed like there was just no rules. There was no right or wrong way to do things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I was just gonna say
spontaneity.
that must have been wild for you coming from, coming from those traditional music lessons and learning that things had to be a certain way for them to be right, when there is really no right.
No.
It's just you. It's you expressing yourself, you finding that place of joy of in the creativity without boundaries. And I think that must have been such a wild turning point for you.
It was, yeah. I was experimenting a lot with those early generation, like the modular systems from the early 70s, like the EML 101 Electrocom, the EMS Synthi AKS, and the Synthi A, which I was very fortunate enough to get my hands on, because these things are very expensive now. The ARP 2600, ARP 2500. I amassed a huge collection of these vintage modular systems during that time. This is in the early 90s. I would call around local universities around the country, because at the time, in the mid to late 90s, a lot of the studios, specifically university studios, were moving over to Pro Tools. They were moving over to completely digital formats, right? So these older, archaic modular systems they just look like junk to people. Like, they were just like, this is such an archaic way of working. Why would we ever want to use this stuff again? So I was like, hey, I'm calling because I would like to purchase any old analog modular equipment that you might have sitting in the back of your closet, which I'm sure none of you guys are using. And it was funny how many places I called where they said, oh yeah, we haven't turned that thing on in years. It's in the back storage room. We've moved over to Pro Tools. It's so much easier. We can multi-track. We don't need to use that thing. We were only using that for teaching like students how to get the basics of fundamental like synthesis and stuff like that. But everyone now is just interested in multi-track recording, and then Avid and Pro Tools became, because they were the first on the scene, became the industry standard for a while. And
Yeah.
still, many people consider them still to be for film and audio editing and
recording.
It just became, it's just the way it happened, So I was really lucky. And then I was able to go in and call these places and buy these old vintage systems that they didn't want anymore at that time, and swoop them up. So I amassed a very large collection of those synths, and my main goal was to learn how to use these instruments and make music with them. That was primarily it. And I wanted to understand different forms of synthesis, whether that was FM synthesis, AM synthesis, granular, additive, you name it. It was basically on my list of wanting to understand and learn what each of these instruments did and what was the reasoning behind the design and the, just everything about the instrument, like how, why, and the where, like I wanted to know. And then I did many, many hours of recording and interacting with the systems, connecting them together, creating many recordings, and experimenting and just seeing what could possibly be done with these systems when they were linked together. So I started making music with them, and I recorded, I don't know, hundreds of 2-hour DATs back in the day.
Yeah.
When we used to have to record to digital audio tape.
Yeah.
And I still have all those tapes. I should go back and revisit them to see if I can retrieve anything that's maybe decent or not.
That would be incredible. I think that could be a new release for you at some point.
It could be, yeah. It's
Richard Devine DATs.
DATs, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was like a renaissance period for me, sort of a period where I was just absorbing tons of information, learning tons of information. I was reading a lot. I had also bought several books at the time about modular synthesis. I bought Alan Strange's book, Also bought the Analog Synthesizer Handbook, which had a lot of the iconic synthesizers throughout time that were used on many hit records, and also obscure records. So kind of gave me a retrospective of like where these instruments came from and the time periods and like the technologies as they evolved. And so I was doing a lot of research into this.
So
Yeah.
so putting those layers of learning together as you were going, like, could you see a path like to where that would eventually lead to? Because I guess for your mom and for a lot of traditional folks, it would be hard to understand exactly what that could lead to because it's so unconventional. Did you see anything like on the horizon while you were learning and doing all this research, or was it just because you were so intrigued by it and you loved it so much?
I'd say both, maybe. It's hard to say because things were constantly in flux at the time, and it still is now. Yeah, it's like it's hard to describe, I guess, when you're constantly learning and trying to absorb new things, and like every week I get sent new instruments, new software, new developer will send me something. I'll get a new hardware device. I get things almost every other day just to get feedback, because I've had so much experience working with hardware and designing sounds for so many companies. A lot of the companies want to send me stuff to see. I was like, how are we doing? Is this machine working? What are its faults? What are the benefits? For usability, they do these usability studies to see how well people are understanding the UI and the UX in the environment and navigating the systems and menus. And is it the workflow making sense? Is it a pleasurable experience? Or is it the exact opposite? Is it frustrating the customer or the client, whoever's wanting to buy the instrument? And so I get roped into a lot of these discussions where we have to make decisions about removing things or adding things to make the user experience more easier and free-flowing and natural, and not have these frustrating obstacles that they constantly run into where they're like, why am I stuck here and I can't get any further and I can't figure out why it's happening? That's like the last thing you want to happen when you're in a creative mindset. You want to just kind of focus on, you want to focus on the important things. You want to be focusing on making music. You want to be focusing on making art that's, you don't want to be caught up in the tools. And it's funny, I know a lot of people look at my studio and they're just like, holy shit, but you have a lot of tools.
Yeah.
But the end of the day, really, it's not about the tools. Like, sure, it's important to have a few tools, but really it's what your brain is doing, the ideas, the concepts, the approaches, the problem solving that your brain is coming up with that can make all of this happen.
Yeah.
And it could be done on a laptop. I could do it on my trash can, beating on a couple drumsticks outside. It doesn't matter. You give me whatever instrument, I'm going to figure out a way to make something musical out of it. And that's always been a fun exercise for me. I just think you just have to think about it differently and not let the negative. I have a lot of friends that I don't want to name any names, but they find something that bugs them and then they're just like, why did they do this in Ableton or, Fruity Loops or Steinberg Cubase or, not that any of those have problems. I'm just using those as examples. But, I have friends of mine that they find something that's extremely annoying to them and they just can't get past this.
Yeah.
This thing that's really sort of like, hey, you know what? Don't let it bother you. Just find a workaround. And you may or may not realize it, but that company might be working on a V2 version that's going to improve that obstacle that you're running into or workflow that seems to be cumbersome now, but on a V2 release may be completely changed and will completely eliminate that and make your user experience be even better on the next release. So
that's
I grew up, I made music with analog synthesizers and sequences that use CV and gate and DIN-sync, and MIDI was just starting to come in. And like, I think like around 1984, I was making some of my first stuff before 1984. I was only using control voltages, CV and gate. That's why I have such a close connection with modular stuff. So it was a very interesting time. Yeah. It was very difficult to make music. People don't realize the struggles that I went through to just make some of the most simplest, stupidest stuff, you know, like stuff now you can do 2 seconds and, you know, like Fruity Loops or, you know, Ableton and Pro Tools or any of these other D.A.Ws. And, but I grew up at a very different time. So I saw where it came from. I saw the beginning and I see where we're at now. And it's just an interesting to look retrospectively on the whole timeline.
Is there, I guess to elaborate on that and expand on that, I mean, a huge part of your life is actually the process of composing, producing, and making music. And then on the other side, there's the sound design side of things, where it's very technical. It's very numbers based. And do you find that you have to separate both worlds and put yourself in the space of, okay, today my goal is to make this beautiful piece of music that I can play in the club and have people nod their head to or dance to or whatever emotion you want to evoke from that. And then on the other side of the sound design, like the decision tree that you typically walk through must, how I imagine it, because I'm not great at sound design, but when I do sort of like tinker, I find it's a different process. So do you put yourself in those two spaces, those two frames of thought when you're doing one and the other?
Absolutely. Yeah. There are days when I spend all day working on just sound design stuff, creating the elements, the ingredients that I'll be using later on. And then I'd spend other days just composing with those ingredients that I created to see how well they work. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And then sometimes I go back to the drawing board and then I refine, and then you kind of start to kind of figure out how the structure of everything is going to get put together. So it's kind of a back and forth process, I'd say. But yes, I separate those. There's days when I'm just purely just designing stuff. And there's days where I'm just purely jamming stuff and just seeing what happens. You know, I've created a large system that's helped me compose quickly. And it took me about 6 years to develop this big system here, where I spent, months and months of time of planning, trying to figure out how I could create music very quickly. Within about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I could have something going, patching only for like 10 minutes and just thinking of an idea. And the whole goal was to kind of like, I come home with this idea, I'd like to try something, but with the modular, sometimes it can be kind of a cumbersome thing, because if you start from scratch, you got to patch it all in, and then you may not even get a good patch, and the patch you had in your mind, you're trying to make, and then you realize this is nowhere even near what I was thinking in my head. It's cool, but it's not what I wanted. And it's easy to steer off path, because you can get along the way when you're building it. There's lots of distractions, and there's lots of spontaneous, like random things that can pop up that can completely steer you off course.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not a bad thing. Sometimes it'll steer you off course into a much cooler thing than what you were working on originally. So it's not always a bad thing, but it can be very unpredictable. So it's a challenge working with modular synthesizers. For me, what I love about it is you can't hang on to anything. You can't go back to it. There's no patch recall. There's no recalling a preset. You have to record it while it's in the moment, or you lose it forever. And I always refer to it as the ghost that lives in the wires. that's only
Yeah.
there for that one moment in time where you got everything just perfect. And it's like this entity that's just fluctuating and moving inside this network of cables. And it's just doing this thing that you just never heard before. It's like you've come across this new species of animal in a forest, and you're like, oh my God, I've never seen this. What is that thing? It's that same feeling that you're getting when you tapped into something, or just all the elements have worked together so perfectly that it's just creating this thing you've never heard before. It's just so alien and foreign to your brain and to your ears that you're just like, I have to record this now. I will never get this again. It'll be gone, and
Yeah.
it's gone into the ethos, and it's disappeared. There's something kind of beautiful about that. I
Yeah, I was just
think
gonna say, yes.
some
It's
people
beautiful.
might disagree with me on that. I have a lot of friends that work in Ableton. They like to be able to open up their session and be like, that's exactly how I last left it. And I'm going to just continue working on where I last left working off. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've worked in plenty of D.A.Ws. I work in Logic and Ableton and all these other ones for my job. And it's great, especially when you're working with clients. They want to make a lot of changes. You need to have a system where you can go back and make those changes very quickly in that same session, and everything has to be exactly the same way that it was saved and recalled the last time that they heard it. You upload that version with the new changes, they approve them, you send it back, you apply the changes, and then you finalize the project. So I think in certain instances and cases, it's good. It's good to work in the box, depending
Yeah.
on the situation, But then if you're doing like creative stuff on your own, I find that working on the modular is much more fun because I'm not looking for going back to it exactly the way it is. I want to really just capture something that's happening in the moment that emotionally is like doing something to me where I'm like, whoa, this is just out of this world. What's going on right now? Like I
Yeah.
have to just capture this.
So when you are creating moments like that, and then you're also, I guess, recording moments for just say patches
Mhm.
or stuff that you've made for Native Instruments or Moog Music. Um, do you ever look back like and say, man, if I had only been able to uh, capture that moment, that time I was playing with a modular synth where it was so beautiful, and it's been very difficult to recapture that. I've been wanting to capture that for this patch, but haven't been able to do that. Um, yeah, so I guess my question is, of the projects you've worked on, did you feel satisfied with your efforts, or do you always look back and say, man, I could have done that better, or I wish there was something else I could have done so that other people could experience that joy that I've experienced and use that in their music, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Yeah, it always comes down to time constraints and deadlines and budgets, getting cut sometimes on projects and stuff. But yes, I've definitely been in situations where, you know, didn't have enough time to finish something, and it wasn't like, I knew it was in a decent place, but not where I really wanted it. I had bigger ambitions to make it go further. Had we had more time, we had like 6 more months. I had that with Google. We worked on many projects at Google. I was head of their ambisonics audio virtual, doing all the audio mixing and sound design for their VR platform, virtual reality platform, Daydream. We worked on that for about 4 years, and so I was doing a lot of ambisonics recording and decoding, and then HRTF tracking within the AmbiX Explorer app and all the proprietary spatialized plugins I was using in Reaper. It was a very complicated, challenging process, and now I'm doing Dolby mixing for Apple. I'm doing all their Dolby spatialized mixes for Apple for 714, and then I've worked a lot with spatialized music and mixing and mastering and spatialized music, and also creating content in spatialized. music, whether it was I started out in 5.1, moved up to 7.1. Now I'm 7.14 for Dolby. And then, before that, with working at Google, we were working purely in ambisonics, Ambert's third, fourth order ambisonics, and which was very different. The algorithms work very differently, especially when you're capturing audio and mics for that. When I worked on Google Earth VR, I don't know if you messed around with Google Earth VR, but I don't know if you have a headset. We have an Oculus and an HTC Vive here Pro that we do a lot of testing with, and it's fun. The VR world is starting to get very interesting, especially for the gaming companies like ID Software and Valve Labs is doing some interesting stuff. There's some great companies out there that are doing some really cool stuff. They're really pushing it to the edge of what's possibly can be done with virtual reality and augmented reality. I know augmented reality is another one that's coming up. That's a lot of companies are starting to kind of try to take advantage of. You have the metaverse with Facebook doing augmented reality meetings and stuff. So I don't think this is going to go away. It's just going to get better. It's just a matter of are people going to really take to it, or they're going to adopt this into their their workplace, or communicating with family members, or just I'm really curious to see where it goes. I'm as far as my role in all this stuff, it's always been creating a more immersive sonic experience while you're exploring these VR or spatialized experiences and stuff. So I spent a lot of time doing spatial mixing, using all these new spatialized tools, many of which are proprietary and not released to the public. They're just internal tools that I'm allowed to use to create these things. I've had to do many projects for Apple. They were internal projects. And it's becoming quite a thing. There's a lot of people moving to the Dolby Atmos format. It's not cheap. It's very expensive. But I have a full Dolby Atmos Studio B room that I just finished in the other room over there, which is 714's 11 speakers. And it was quite a lot of money to set up. But it was expensive, but it was great. I built it last year, and I spent basically the entire year learning how to use it, and I had already done a lot of work in 5.1 and 7.1 mixing for video games. It was just basically adding the two upper channels, the left and right, front and rear speakers. So adding those speakers in and figuring out with the object panners where these sounds would move around in the mix. That's basically the hardest part, is trying to figure out how to not get too cheeseball with it, because you can get kind of out of hand with mixing in Dolby. You throwing the guitars up on the ceiling and spinning them around or whatever. It can get very I don't know what the word is, and kind of gimmicky. If you don't do it right, there's a fine line. If you can do it tastefully, and the elements in the song, and the core of the song is still there, and it still has some resemblance to the stereo mix, but you can just slightly enhance some of the elements to kind of work on other speakers and kind of envelop you into this experience, it can sometimes be done very very well and give you an entirely different experience where you're just like, wow, I'm listening to the track. Before I was listening to the track, but now I'm inside the track where it's around me, and the layers and the textures are trinkling around my head and doing these figure eight, just it's it can be very, very
that's
very
goosebump worthy listening.
It's very goosebump worthy. Yes, it is. It's very, very interesting. And fascinating, and I've been heading the team at Apple for doing that. I'm their main person that's doing all the spatialized audio content and moving forward and stuff like that. So it's an exciting area that I think that's only going to get better. The technology is getting better with every 3 to 6 month cycle, we're seeing huge, monumental, exponential jumps in the technology and how much better things are. Now we have personalized HRTFs for our ears, where you scan your phone and it scans the actual inside of your inner ear.
What?
And then it creates a profile that you can load into your iPhone 14 Pro. And then that personalized HRTF file gets loaded into each one of your AirPod Pros. That gives you even more of an accurate experience based off the actual,
That's scary. In a good
the
way.
typology of your ear and like all the curves and, so you're getting a really, really accurate representation of what you're hearing. So they're only getting better. They're getting much, much better. They're trying to make it more accurate. The HRTF tracking is even improving. And now they've added even more modes. There's the Dolby renderer mode. There's the Apple Music rendering mode. There's the binaural fold down mode. And then you have multiple different modes if you want to hear and export your song to hear it in different formats. Say like Apple Music, for instance. This was the big one everyone was complaining about. Like all these mastering engineers were like, well, shit, I just did my Atmos mix. I just heard it on Apple Music and it sounds like shit. So yeah, we had to fix that. So there was a lot of research to figure out how we could give that capability to our user base and make it easy for them to test the mixes out before they get committed to Apple Music. So all the mastering engineers knew that what they were mixing wasn't going to be a surprise once it get implemented into the to the Dolby Apple Music playlist. So there have been some huge strides and some big jumps over the last few months that have really kind of have made things a lot better. Yeah.
And you're right on the cutting edge of all of that stuff. And man, it's just, I can imagine it's such an incredible place to be. And the amount of learning because it is a continuous sort of learning curve as we delve into the future of sound and space. Mm-hmm. That leads me to my next question. And there are only a few main questions left. And then if you're okay, we can move on to the rapid fire round.
Sure.
But if you had a time machine, what would your present day ears tell your 20-year-old ears?
A time machine, and I could go back to any point in time, and just is the question to where I would go back in time and go listen or be in the time and space, and
just being that you're, I guess as we get older, the way we listen, I guess changes, and the way that the amount of stuff that your ears have, I guess, learned over the decades of doing the work that you've been doing, the wonderful work you've been doing. As you gotten older, obviously, some people, they lose hearing and that type of thing, and maybe their ears get worse, but at this stage of your career, do you feel like if your ears had a persona and your ears went back in time and had a conversation with your ears at 20 years old, the 20-year-old ears, what would those older, wiser ears tell the younger, aspiring, excited for the future ears?
Wear earplugs.
Yeah.
Protect your hearing. Wear earplugs. Because I played thousands of festivals over the past 15, 20 years where, I've got a little bit of damage on my right ear from the monitors being in the booth or on stage on the right. They would always be playing loud, and I'd probably tell them, take care of your ears. That's the most important thing you've got. They're your most valuable tools. The most valuable equipment you have is your ears. your brain in your ears. I'll say it over and over again. Like, I know people see my studios like, oh my God, you got every piece of gear. And it's like, the gear doesn't mean anything without you. It
Mm.
doesn't mean anything. It's useless. It's just a bunch of boxes sitting in a room. It's the operator, the person that has the idea, the brain, the concept. That's really what's the most important thing. That's what people take away. It's not what piece of gear you used or software you used, or it's the idea, the approach, that spark of like, oh shit, that sounded really cool. What did he do to make that happen?
Mm-hmm.
That's really important. Yeah, it's like, yeah, if I were looking back and like telling myself 20 years ago, I don't know if I would change much, because I don't think I've changed much since I was 20, to be honest with you. I've been kind of on the same path of just constantly never letting it go, always looking for the next thing.
Mm.
It's kind of like this. I love this quote by Steve Jobs. He said, if you just did something really great, accomplished something really great, you shouldn't really dwell on it too long. You should just move on to the next thing.
Mm.
And it's true. I find that to be so true, like you could do something really wonderful that affects people, but, find out what you're going to do next. Find out what the next great thing you're going to do is. And I think that's such a great quote, because that's how I've lived a lot of my life. I never really dwelled much on the past, on past things I did. I was always like, yeah, that was cool, but now I want to know what I can do with this. I want to push this. I want to try this. And I'm curious to see what happens. And I think my curiosity is what kills me. I'm just such a curious person. I just have to know. I'm one of those people. It's like, I know I have to buy that piece of equipment. I got to understand why people like this so much.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I'll buy it and I'm like, wow, this really wasn't what I thought it was, and I'm going to sell it. Or it would be something where like, I understand now why people like this, or some software. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be a hardware. There's been so many things where I just wanted an understanding of how it was affecting people, why it was affecting people in such a profound way to make them think it was a life-changing thing. So I'm always interested in that, and will always be looking.
When things got hard, you never thought about quitting?
Never. Somehow it always worked out. And I've been in the industry for over 30 years. It always worked out. I don't know how. Maybe I'm just lucky. And maybe I could give you guys a couple pointers. Like, if you're starting out, I think an important thing is that you should try to develop your own voice, something that you can boutiquely call your own thing. And I think that's what's most important. It would separate you from other people that are in the industry, right? So I'm focused on a lot of high-tech sound design, which was kind of a boutique thing. So of course I wasn't getting all the gigs, I was getting a lot of like high-tech commercial gigs with like BMW or Verizon or AT&T, Sony, a lot of these companies that were looking for techie type sounds for their commercials or for their projects, or even for the video game. When I was working in video game, a lot of the gaming companies, it was like, oh, Richard's going to be the perfect guy. We need like high tech, like UI sounds. There's no one better that does that type of stuff than him. So we should give him a call, see if he's available to work on this. So I really try to focus on the areas that I felt like I do really well in, and then just kept pushing those areas. And then eventually the clients were like, Rich did a really killer job on this game. We need to hire him again because we want even more killer sounds again like that. Like, I think when people spread themselves out too thin, like trying to do too many things, it can kind of water down what you do. But if you focus on something that you know you're really good at, and you like tell yourself, you know what, I'm going to be the best person at this. I want to be the guy that all the companies come to because I'm the only person that can do this weird thing that not many other people can do. You know what I mean? So I kind of got
Yeah.
lucky. I got very lucky because I also took up on a lot of jobs that were challenging, very unsexy, unchallenging, very challenging jobs that somehow use sound design to enhance the user experience for some of these products, So, I remember working with Barnes and Noble on their Nook tablets, and I had to design all the sounds for them. They were a very difficult client. That was a tricky one because I had to make everything sound like very natural. I had to record sounds of like books, pages of a book, turning while if the user was scrolling on a page and on the tablet, it sounded and felt, even with the haptics, everything all had to feel like you were actually turning a page, So that was a lot of work, and then I had to record over a couple hundred books to get the pages right. It was very difficult to get it just right, to make it feel like you were actually turning a page. Something as simple as that, would take a long time to get it really, really right, to make it feel right, emotionally feel right, like psychologically, everything locks together, and you're like, that's a convincing gesture, working with the haptics and the movement of your hand. That's believable to me, It enhances the user experience. Yeah, it's fascinating, and we're getting into even more crazy stuff now with like artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is a very interesting area that I've been doing a lot of research in, as far as not only with music composition, but for sound design applications. And I've already worked on several projects with like Yamaha, for instance. I worked on their smart morph technology, which is a very interesting concept as far as using ML-based technologies where you feed it data sets, say like 6, 7 data sets within the montage synthesizer. This is what it's implemented. And for people who aren't really good at programming FM, because FM can be very daunting synthesis method to program in and get good sounds out of, they developed this ML-based system that allows you to pick, say, like 6 or 7 of your favorite FM patches and load them into the montage. What the montage will do in the ML AI mode is it will generate 1,024 generative variations off of these 6 patches that you've chosen. So you chose a bass patch in slot 1. It will give you 1,000 variations off that bass sound that's very similar to that bass sound, but it'll give you, variations. And what you do is you take inside the interface, it's a touch screen, you have a trajectory vector that's like a vector line that you can place anywhere graphically on these regions on the screen. And the way that the screen is represented it looks like, like a map of different countries or something. But those maps are different colors, they're different shapes and stuff, and it's the algorithm that's created these variations and that's placed them in these different regions on the screen. So you can travel through them to hear these different sounds when you drop one of these trajectory vector lines, and you can even automate that with an LFO or a mod wheel or modulation. So you could just kind of like move your finger and find one. Oh, that preset's great. You can stop, and then you can save your preset from that. And so you're basically just traveling through all these derivatives of all your favorite presets. And you can even mix presets too. You can mix like 2 different presets and come up with like combinations of like a bass and bell tone, or a bass and pad sound, or a bass and some non-musical noisy sound design crazy thing to see what happens. It's very interesting, some of the sounds you get, and it doesn't take much effort. It's basically finding all of the possible variations that you could get based off these data sets that you've inputted into the algorithm.
Where do the data sets come from?
The data sets were actually created by me.
Oh.
I was the one, the sound designer responsible. So I spent 6 months creating hundreds and hundreds of data set sounds that would be fed into the ML engine. So we tried to pick a lot of popular stuff. We tried to pick a lot of wild stuff in between. So it was a lot of bass lead, pads, pluck sounds, you name it, percussive. And I went in and designed a whole library that would feed the ML engine. But you could continue training it. You don't have to train it just with sounds that I created, I just had to create a basic set that users would be able to load up when they buy the unit, and they'd have 128 data set models that they could import in. Better than having nothing, but so they could at least understand the concept. And then you have the ability using your own imported data sets. You can make your own data sets, and which is extremely powerful. Yeah, you offer that. Like it's some people might say it's cheating, but it's a fast way. A lot of people have much less time to work on music these days. Like they've got jobs, they've got kids like me, and and you want to get to stuff. You want stuff to happen faster and not have to spend hours laboring to get some of these sounds when you could just use something like this AI ML based FM engine that can generate many, many, many infinite combinations of different variations of sounds. Just snap up a button.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've come leaps and bounds from downloading from torrent sites sound packs and sifting through sound by sound by sound and no rhyme or reason to the organization structure. But now we're sort of like in an age where, you can have these data sets and just kind of like let the machine learn your patterns.
And they're only going to train it with more. Yeah, we're seeing emergent drums and TensorPunk plugins are starting to show up, which are doing generative percussion samples where you can they've trained it with, like over 10,000 data set models, and they can generate completely copyright-free, brand new, never heard before drums, snares, kicks, hi-hats, closed hi-hats, crashes, and stuff like. And I've already been experimenting with a lot of this stuff. I've been keeping up with just about every third-party plugin manufacturer that's been investigating AI ML based technology. So not only in the applications of sound design, but also for music composition. I'm also looking for analyzing a track, studying the tempos, the key changes and all that stuff, and then being able to give you derivative versions of that track that you fed it, whether it's your own track or if it's somebody else's track. And this is an idea that has been around for many, many years. But they're just now starting to have the computing power to do this stuff. And I think 4 or 5 years from now, we may not be able to tell the difference between an AI-generated pop song from a song that was created from a human. Because it's getting scary, eerily.
Good.
The first stages are showing some really interesting promise. So, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think a lot of people will disagree with me. It's like, well, then who's even making the music anymore? Is it the algorithms that are making the music? Then where's the human input in this? And I can see the argument for both sides. So I think we might be becoming just more music curators at this point in the future. So it's all interesting topics to discuss, I think, while we're in this ever-changing world of technology that's moving in this direction, whether we like it or not. We're just either embrace it or you don't.
Absolutely. And you're playing a role in the development and the pushing forward of the technology that might make us obsolete one day. So
it could. Or maybe it wouldn't. I'm all about abusing it and using it wrong. I want to confuse the algorithms. I don't want to use it in a traditional way. I want to feed it just a bunch of nonsense and see what comes up. Feed it like 10 different styles that have nothing to do with each other, and then see what it comes up with. I really want to push it and see what has never been done before and see what would happen. Just confuse it, like confuse the algorithm, and then give it stuff where it's like, what are you giving me? I don't even know how to, you never know, you might get something you've never heard before. And that really ultimately, it's like I said in the beginning, that's a goal for me. I'm always going to try to find a way to break the system to get something I've never heard before, even if it means doing the most ridiculous, absurd thing possible.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, I can't wait to see what comes of your work in the next 5-10 years. I'm super, super excited about that. You did touch upon our last question, which was, is there any advice you could give to upcoming music creators? And I think you gave them something really wonderful there. So I think it's safe for us to move on to the rapid fire round. Not super in depth and technical, just very simple, short answers. Just some common questions we like to ask all of our guests to just give a little bit of a fun sort of highlight for our listeners, just to let them know how you think about these questions. Okay, so the first question, number one, here's a rapid fire round. What D.A.W do you use and why?
If you can see behind me, I'm using Logic Audio.
All right.
But I use Nuendo, Cubase, and Ableton 11, and Reaper.
Wow.
But I would say Logic is my main one. But if I'm doing spatialized audio, spatialized mixing, and for ambisonics, I do it in Reaper. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Favorite analog synths?
Favorite analog synths, I would say Jupiter 6. Trying to think, what else do I have? I have so many. Jupiter 6 is one of my favorites. The Prophet 5 is another nice one if we're looking at keyboards. But like, if we're looking for more like eccentric, stranger stuff, I'd say the EMS Synthy by AKS was one of my favorites. Electrocomp EML 101, ARP 2600, which I have two of them. They're great synths. But if I had to pick a desert island synth where I could only have one, I would say it would be the Nord G2 modular by Clavia Nord. That synth is just still to this day so far ahead of its time, and I still use it, and it's just an incredibly beautiful design interface. It came out in 2004, but it's still so ahead of its time. It would be my desert Ireland synth. I could make music all day on that. And if I didn't have that, MacBook Pro M1 Max.
Wow.
64 gigs of RAM, 8 terabyte hard drive. You give me that and an MP1. You just give me an MP1 as a controller.
Yeah.
And a pair of headphones, and I could do anything with that.
Amazing.
Really, yeah. If you just give me a pair of headphones, I really don't need much. Even though I have a ton of studio gear, everybody looks at my studio and just like, what the hell is going on here? This is absolutely insane. How do you use all this stuff? I was like, well, I don't use it all at the same time. I'm more of a kind of more intimate person where I like to get more intimate with an instrument and kind of learn it and spend time with just that and try to do more with less. And I think the only reason why my studio has acquired so much stuff is because I've worked with so many companies. Like every single synthesizer that's in this room, I worked with them. I can tell you like Korg, Korg, Novation, Moog, Sequential Circuits. I'm looking at Clavia, Virus, Roland, Black Corp, more Roland. Yeah, every single keyboard that I have in here, Moog One, Waldorf, Quantum, Eventide, all the Electron boxes, I actually worked on all of the factory internal presets of these machines. So I kept them around because I know them. So when I'm working on projects, I can do things extremely quickly because I had already worked designing all the sounds for the factory patches for them. And it's just nice to have a collection of stuff that you have worked on, just a history of machines that you
have a history. That's your museum spaceship.
Museum spaceship, yeah, exactly, yeah. So there's a definite reason why I have these keyboards here. They're just not here because I bought them or whatever. They're here very much because I have worked on every single one of them, and I have a very close relationship with those companies, and I know, most importantly, am very familiar with how to use them and use them quickly. I don't have many keyboards here that I didn't work on. I find myself, if I didn't work on it, make sounds for it, then it usually goes. I need to usually work much quicker and efficiently. I have to come up with a lot of sounds very quickly. So I tended to keep all the stuff that I worked on for that reason.
Yeah. So I guess that really connects to our next question, which is, what are your favorite plugins, whether you've like plugins that you've worked on or plugins that you haven't worked on? Actually, I think the more interesting question would be, what are your favorite plugins that you haven't worked on?
Honestly, I don't think I've not worked on any plugins that. So I worked with Native Instruments for about 23 years. I worked on all the NI stuff, so we can move them out. I worked on quite a bit of the isotope stuff as well. Man, I'd have to look at my like plugin folder of stuff.
Or Omnisphere?
I worked with Eric Persian. Yep, I've got many presets. I've got about 128 presets in Omnisphere. Yep. I worked with Eric quite a bit. Yeah. Just type in my name. Type in the search engine. There's some pretty fun patches in there that most people don't know about in Omnisphere. Omnisphere is great. Eric does amazing work. He's a phenomenal sound designer. He makes incredibly high quality products. I've Trillion. I have the whole entire package. RMX, Trillion, and Keyscape, all of them. Even the new expansion packs that just came out for Omnisphere. I have all of them. I think they do a wonderful job. Their standards and their quality of standards is extremely high. I have a lot of respect for what Eric does. They do make some very, very, very compelling, beautiful instruments that are very useful. And was very lucky to work with them as well as a client. Yeah, so I love them. Another company I wanted to mention that I feel like sometimes doesn't get a lot of credit is Ars Heckman, Yuhi, who made Zebra 2 and Hive. And I don't know if you've checked out his plugins, but if you go to yuhi.com, Ars Heckman is an extremely amazing DSP programmer who makes some of the most beautifully rich quality virtual synthesizing instruments that I've ever got my hands on. Beautiful interfaces. I think I pretty much own every product he's ever put out, and they're just great. The UIs are great. They're really fast. They're beautiful to look at. They're just in the sonic quality of them. It's just like, it's beautiful. They're just astonishing. Repo 1, Repo 5, there's emulations to Prophet 5, all the way to D.A.W, which is like their ultimate analog synthesizer, which is a little bit CPU intensive, but is absolutely stunning as far as the sound quality goes. And Hive, which there's Ace, and they have a whole host of really, really interesting plugins. I'm hoping one day they'll do like a drum synthesis plugin, because that would be really, really exciting. But they're incredible. They're absolutely incredible as far as quality. One of my favorites. And another one I wanted to throw out there, because I don't think they get enough credit, is my friend Magnus Lindstrom from Sonic Charge, who had made Microtonic VST, and he made Permeate, which is this crazy granular processing plugin that uses a lot of different processing algorithms. And he's always been such a creative force behind making really interesting, innovative plugins. It's been around for almost 20 years. And, I think a lot of people just had forgotten, because it's like older stuff. But he just updated all his plugins, and I still use them to this day. They're great. They're just awesome plugins that come up with really cool, interesting combinations, and highly recommended. They're very cheap, $59, nothing too expensive. Highly recommended. There's just so many. I have like 4,000 something plugins in my.
Jeez.
Yes.
How do you go through them all?
I stuff through Logic. Yeah, I have categories. I have like granular, I have additive, I have spectral, I have like special filters. So I break things down. So it's easier when I go down through my plugin management list. I know exactly what I'm looking for. It's like, I need a granular processor, more aggressive or less aggressive, smeary or fragmented, and so I know where to go. So it's a lot easier for me to get the plugins I'm looking for, basically based on the timbre process that I'm looking for. So yeah, that's kind of how
Okay, awesome. Number 5, what is a sound that always brings you joy?
My kids laughing.
I like that.
Every
Oh.
time they laugh, my kids, especially my son, when I start tickling him, his giggles, nothing like it. It really,
Yeah.
like a kid's joy, like it's hard to explain to people that don't have kids. You know, I didn't understand it before I had kids. Before I had kids, it was like a foreign thing. I was like, oh, I don't want any kids. Me and my wife, we've been together like 21 years, and we were at a point where we're like, oh, we're not gonna have kids. We want to travel the world and you know tour and do all the fun things. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden she turned 35. She's like, I'm gonna have kids. I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna have kids.
Yeah.
So when we had kids, that was a big change for me because it
Mm.
changed my lifestyle, changed my work hours, it changed the focus became more or less, it was about them. Everything was all about them now. We really rearranged our lives for them. Not totally. We didn't like lose our lives to them, but we had to make some serious
Yeah.
changes and be much more responsible adults
Hmm.
because now we have to keep these two creatures alive that we've created and
Yeah.
keep them healthy and give them a nice house and food and all those things. But just the joy that you get hanging out with your kids, especially today. My kids came in here and had a modular jam with me. My daughter's
Wow.
10 and my son's 5, and they're both interested in music. They're learning how to use GarageBand and Logic, and they've grown up with instruments all around them because we live in a house where we have thousands of instruments everywhere. So
Yeah.
my kids are just naturally playing with stuff and picking up stuff. My daughter's in guitar lessons and vocal lessons, and she's already starting to take off and do really well and writing her own songs. And I don't know if there's any greater sound than like the sound that gives me more happiness is when I hear my kids giggling when I'm tickling them, or
Yeah.
it's just this primal. I don't know how to describe it, but just something so close to your heart. It's your own DNA. It is your own creation. These are
Yeah.
these creatures are something that you created, and now they're hanging out with you, having fun in your studio, playing your music gear and
Hmm.
giggling and laughing and having fun with you. And I think that concept is just absolutely mind blowing. That like, hey, like 10
I think
years
so too.
ago, you didn't even exist. I created you with my wife. And now you're this being that's hanging out with me, communicating with me, and making music with me.
Yeah.
That is definitely like, for some people, that just might be just normal. Yeah, just like a normal everyday
No,
thing. But
that I agree with you. That is a mind blowing thing.
it's a mind blowing
Uh,
thing. It's a thing where you're just like, they weren't there 10 years ago, and now I have these two little beautiful little children that are just hilarious and comical and these wonderful personalities, and they're teaching me things now. I love
mhm.
that. They teach me. They have a whole different perspective on the world and the way things should be done. So
Yeah.
I'm
And it's
once
incredible to
again
me
humbled.
that after all of the sounds that you have processed audibly throughout your life pre having kids, and then you have these kids, and then um, clearly, without hesitation, your answer is that the sound that always brings you joy is that sound of my children laughing, and
Absolutely
that's
gets
the
me
that's
every
the
time.
yeah, that's the beauty of, I guess, life and the creation of
Absolutely.
life, and yeah, the whole emotional processing of that sonic. It's crazy.
It really is, yeah. Until it sounds silly, I know it probably like sound like the old dad, the silly dad, this response, but like when you have your own kids and they do that, you understand what I mean, like just the feeling that it gives you. It's just the best. Yeah, I had no idea that it would be that my favorite sound. It would bring me so much
Yeah.
joy and
Well,
comedy. They're funny too.
yeah. We're actually trying. I'm getting married in a couple of weeks, and yeah, we had a little bit of a situation where yeah, my fiance got pregnant, and
Oh, okay, cool.
but we were so excited about the possibilities of this, because we are a little bit older as well, and
Yeah, I'm 47, so I understand.
yeah, it unfortunately the baby it didn't stick, but we're looking forward to trying again for the next year. So yeah, I'm on board with you on those thoughts, and I'm ecstatic that was the answer that you gave.
Trust me, they're going to bring an energy into your house, into your life that was never there before. That like you'll come home and he's for 15 years come home to my wife, or 12 years when we lived in the same house for almost 20 years, and I thought that we had it all, but then when we had the kids, they just brought this whole different energy, this whole different life into our house that just wasn't there before. It just really wasn't. It's just a strange thing to think about, come home now, and there's 2 creatures I made that are just like doing the funniest things, making me laugh and being silly, and like, it's just it's just like my dad said, it was the best thing they ever did. And I didn't believe him because, it's just like, I'm too caught up in doing all these other things, and I was like, how am I going to have time for kids? My schedule is crazy. I'm working on the most insane, crazy projects. And then, but really at the end of the day, my favorite thing to do is just to jump on the couch and grab my kids and tickle them.
That's beautiful.
The simple, just those most simple things that really bring me the kind of happiness that I never ever would have imagined it being that way. If you asked me that like 10 years ago, I would have probably given you a totally different answer.
Yeah.
But yeah, now I'm in a different part of my life where they really, really do are like they're just so funny and witty and surprising. Just the things they do, and this. It's nonstop.
Do you see yourself in them a lot, or is it more like you see your wife in them more?
We see both of us in them. Yes, it's really interesting. Yeah, I see my good sides and my bad sides in my daughter, and I see my good sides and my bad sides in my wife and my daughter. Yeah, so they equally get all the good and bad in us. But it's so interesting. It's fascinating to see how they just just from DNA and genetically how they grow up. They're you. They're basically new versions of you.
That's insane.
It's really it's fascinating. I gotta admit that I feel blessed that I was able to get a son and a daughter, and they were such wonderful kids. And now I sound like this old sompy dad, but it's like, but yeah, it really is. They really, really do change your life. They make life a lot more fun, for sure.
Amen. Thank you for that answer.
A lot more fun.
Okay, so number 6, how would you rank yourself for the following skill sets?
Okay.
Number 1, beat making.
Is there a rating scale?
Yeah, like 1 out of 10. Or 1 to 10, sorry.
So 1 would be the best, or 10 being the best?
10 would be the best.
Oh man, I don't know. Shoot, am I a good beat maker? Am I a good bad beat maker? I really don't know, because a lot of my beats are so out there, and like really weird. I don't know. That's a hard one to answer. I don't know. Like,
It's a subjective.
About this, I don't know. Maybe somewhere in the middle. I don't know if I'm like the best. I try to make really strange stuff and try to explore things and weird time signatures and weird stuff. But I don't know if that means that necessarily makes you better. I don't know if I don't know if I have the authority to even say where I'm at. I mean, that's a weird question, I have no idea, to be honest with you, because my stuff is so out there that I don't even know if I'm even on the radar. Like, if I'm even, compared to these other people, like, I'm sure people hear my beats and are like, I've gotten lots of nice compliments about the beats and stuff I've made, but I've never really been asked a question like that. I don't even know how to really even answer that because it's subjective. Because I think a lot of people could hear my stuff and be like, "Oh, he's like the best beat maker in the world," but then someone else would hear it who doesn't understand maybe the style of music that I make or the approaches that I do, and hear that and be like, "Oh, that's complete garbage. It just sounds like a bunch of drums falling down a staircase." And which I've gotten both ends of the spectrum where they just think it's either pure brilliance or they just think it's complete garbage and they don't understand, or it's just they just don't get it, or they get it and it's just not their cup of tea. There's also that situation where I recognize that he has some talent. It's just not my cup of tea. Different strokes for different folks, and there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody has the right.
If you can tour with your beats and play shows and make a living off that, I think that's high rated right there. There's a vast appreciation for what you do, and I think if people are willing to spend however much money that are charged for a show like that, then I think that's a high rank right there.
Well, thank you. I never really thought about it that way. Yeah, I guess I've never really thought about where I've ranked and stuff. I've always just, gonna sound weird, but I've always been in my own bubble, kind of in this weird bubble where I'm just exploring and doing all this stuff on my own and discovering new things, and then I just kind of work just in my own little weird space.
Would it be hard to rank yourself for sound design?
Oh, wow. There's so many better sound designers than me. I would say Ben Burt is my all-time favorite sound designer of all time. Ben Burt, if you're not familiar with, he works at Pixar now. Well, no, he was working at Pixar at Skywalker Ranch, but Ben was responsible for many of the iconic sounds of the early Star Wars 70s films. Lifesavers, sound of R2-D2, where he made that on the ARP 2600. These were sounds that I grew up with and following Ben's work for many, many years. He had a very scientific, very level-headed approach to sound design, making sounds that were ordinary, but kind of making them sound bigger than life. And he was always focusing on the emotive feeling you get from the sounds. Like, for instance, he was the first sound designer to win an Academy Award for Best Vocal Performance for Eva and Wall-E for the movie Wall-E. I don't know if you saw Wall-E. About the little robot that's gathers garbage up.
I saw the trailer. I haven't seen the whole thing.
Oh, you should watch it.
Probably, please.
Yeah. Blow your
Did you
mind.
watch it with your kids?
Oh, yeah, my kids love it. Yeah. The first 20 minutes of that film are almost silent. There's no talking or dialogue in the first 20 minutes. It's all sound. And it is just so well done. And Ben did all of it. And the voice articulations of Eva and Wall-E, the way that he made them communicate with each other, even though they weren't speaking English, you could understand what they were saying because of the way his articulations and the way that he's able to express certain like gestures and vocalizations. Just like you knew exactly what they were talking about, even though they weren't speaking the English language. It's just, I don't know who could do that. I mean, just the level of communication and expressing emotion, happy, sadness through things where you're not even speaking a language. It's a made-up language.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really hard to do, to really connect to the human heart and brain with sound like that. To me, it's just not many people have.
Did he make the Chewbacca whale?
I think so. Yes.
Really? That's awesome.
He is very, very much the guy who made all of the iconic sounds, Lifesavers, everything. in all of the early 1970s Star Wars films, which is really funny. Those are my son's favorite versions of the Star Wars. He doesn't like the animated versions. He doesn't like The Mandalorian. He doesn't like any of the other stuff. He just likes the original Empire Strikes Back, all the original
The classics.
70s, the classics. For some reason, that's his favorite ones, which I was just like,
That's my son. That's my
That's my son. Yeah.
Cool. What is your reaction or facial expression when you know you made some heat?
Man. I don't know if I really have a facial expression.
Is this it?
It's a funny one. Maybe, yeah. Sometimes, a lot of times, I'm just staring blankly at my session or my module, and I'm just kind of sitting there. I'm more of just kind of a thinking, like deep thinking phase. It's not like oh yeah, I really nailed this one. I'm always like this, like, is that working together? Or is that something need to be removed? Or does something need less presence or more presence? Or is there something just not... I'm always analyzing to see if it can be improved or if something can be removed, actually.
Gotcha.
So that's my thought process. It's like take away or add to see if it improves the feel of what we're doing. Because ultimately, does it sound good is the most important thing to me. Does it sound good? Does it grab you? Does it sound good? And if what you're doing is not sounding good, then you need to maybe start over. Yeah, and restart the process. So,
gotcha.
and I don't know if it's necessarily a face that I make, but it's more of an investigative kind of like...
like a detective.
A detective, yeah. Just like I kind of sit there and I'm like, maybe we could change some things about this to improve this, to make it even more impactful, or more captivating, or more alluring to the listener. Yeah, that's kind of all. I'm much more of an analytical person than I am like oh yes, I just made a heater right there, you know. I just more trying to construct things that either make decisions that'll hopefully make it better.
Yeah.
Or removing things if that makes it better. And that's usually, it's like a process of removal or addition or redoing it all from scratch again. That could also be an option. If it's something that, I come back to and I'm like, I don't know what I was thinking there. It's just not working today,
Got it.
So it's all based on emotions. When you think about it, all of this is driven 100% basically on how you feel and your emotions. People talk about a technology, they talk about this, they talk about that, but we're all dealing with the human emotion and how the emotional response to what you're creating, what you're sonically creating. It's really.
But I love how there's a science to it as well. There's
absolutely
sort of like this hypotheses that you come up with, and based off of what you get back, like you said, you add or subtract based off of the emotional observation or analysis of that, whatever you just did, hitting that hypothesis. So
exactly,
really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 8, what is the secret to staying relevant and the secret to longevity in a music career such as yours?
Good question. The number one thing I could say about that is stay curious and always stay curious. And number 2, don't ever think that you've learned it all. I know a lot of producers that I've met where they're like, oh, I've learned it all. I know everything. I don't need to, I don't need to study anymore. I found my sweet spot. I found my favorite tools, and that's all I need, and that's fine. I'm not arguing with those people. Those people seem to do really fine. But for me, my own personal take on it is you should never stop looking. You should always be looking for the next big thing. We were just talking about a quote that Steve Jobs had made many, many years ago to his life. He said, if you just made something really, really great, you created something really cool, you shouldn't dwell on it for very long. You should start looking for the next cool thing to make.
Yeah.
And I just love that because that's exactly what I do. It's the exact same thing. And that quote that Steve wrote is just, that speaks volumes to me because it's so true. I'm always like making the next new thing. I'm always looking for that next new thing. What's on the horizon? What's the next thing that's going to blow people's minds or blow my mind up, Like,
Yeah.
sure, I make all these cool things that I've done for many companies and stuff, but I never go back and dwell on them and think about them. And maybe we might go back and analyze what we did so we don't repeat what we did, or try to see if we could do what we could do better for the next time. But in general, I find that to be a really fascinating quote that really speaks volumes to me, that, you should never really dwell on, say you did something really good that you felt really proud about, and that, but you should never really dwell on it too long. Just think about what you're going to do with the next thing.
When do you move on from something that doesn't actually work out well?
Oh, I've done that many times. Yeah. Mostly in my experimental phases where I'm trying different things and, experimenting, sometimes using new technology that I'm not familiar with, new plugins, new tools. Sometimes I get really great results. Sometimes I don't get great results and I don't gel really well with the interface or how it's set up. So it can be a bit of a hit or miss thing, So it's not like I pick up every piece of gear and I instantly make amazing music with it or amazing sound design with it. It's really something that you just kind of have to try it out and see how well the chemistry is between you and that instrument. Like how their work flows, how they want the user to interact with that instrument, what features they've added in, does it speak to you? Does those features speak to you? Does the UI speak to you? Does the way you interact with it speak with you? And how does it feel? Do you feel confident with this instrument to where you feel like you could do some cool stuff with it? Or are you kind of lost in the menus and are just, frustrated and pulling your hair out, just trying to do the most simplest things, which it could go either way. You really don't know until you get your hands on it, So it's just something you just have to do trial and error and experiment with.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Anything you would like to promote?
I have a new record coming out next year. Coming on Planet New Records. I haven't finished the name yet, but it will be a 3 vinyl album. It'll also be available digitally and on CD, as well as Bandcamp and all the other Spotify and streaming services. And it is becoming quite an unusual, strange record. And I'm also going to be mixing a version Dolby Atmos at 714, which is what I'm currently working on right now. And so I'm really excited to release that album because it's kind of like the next step of super crazy stuff. There's a lot of really unusual, forward, groundbreaking, strange, I don't even know, Alien versus Predator is basically the best way I could describe it. It's pretty out there.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to get this record out. Maybe do some touring next year once things settle back from the post-pandemic situation. So I'm hoping to do some more festivals next year and stuff like that and get back out again. But at this point, very happy working on the new album, finishing that up, which is almost finished. So should have it ready by like November of next year is my projected date. Yeah, that's really about it.
Super excited about that and hope you can make it out to Vancouver when you do tour.
Yes, I'd love to come to Vancouver. Such, like I said, beautiful place. Could totally move there.
Hey, bring the family, get a nice little place here. Maybe you can use it as a back and forth between Atlanta and here.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, we always love going there. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. Yeah, we like Seattle, Portland, that whole area, going all the way up. I've been all the way up that whole area, and Montana is beautiful. I played a lot of festivals in Montana as well, Missoula, the whole area, Spokane, like even in between towns like Spokane, Washington, and it's just so many beautiful spots up there. It's a really pretty part of the country, and um, yeah, I'd come back
Awesome.
anytime.
Perfect. Well, that pretty much concludes the interview, Richard. I am so
Okay,
thankful that you were so generous with your time, and that
sure.
we've talked about such a wide variety of topics related to sound design,
Hmm.
music, and your career.
Sure.
The last thing I was hoping for
Sure.
was could you give our community a shout out and goodbye using the word sonically in it, and kind of like a
Sonically.
sort of like, yeah, our
Oh,
platform called
sonically.
Sonically, yeah. And basically, yeah, just with some words of encouragement, if possible.
So okay. So you're pursuing your passion for music through sonically.
Yeah, that's great. And
Okay.
maybe, yeah, just a message for them. Like, if any of these folks are feeling discouraged, they feel like quitting,
Mhm.
um, what are what's some advice for them, or some words of encouragement that you can give them, I guess.
Yeah, if you're running into, any roadblocks, obstacles during the creative process, which I've run into many times, sometimes the number one thing to do is just step away from it. Just step away and go for a walk. Go walk in the woods, look at something else, get your mind off it. Step away, because sometimes trying to fight it and stay with it can sometimes just make things worse, and put you even more in a negative sort of mental state, which I found. So a lot of times I just leave the project, turn it off. Sometimes I work on something else. Sometimes I just work on something completely different. Instead of working on the song, I'll work on sound design, or I'll just play around with some other instrument that I just got that takes my brain completely away from it. And then I might come back to it to a couple hours, and then I'm in a completely different mindset. I'm not in
Mhm.
that negative, frustrated mindset. And then I sit back and I listen to what I had made and I say, oh, now I know what to do. I can, I'm in a much better mental state to make a more creative decision to continue finishing this. So sometimes simply walking away and taking a
Mhm.
break is a good exercise that I like to do a lot. Um, and, or do something else. Do something other than what you were working on and take a break from it, and to get your mind off it for a second, and to kind of rewire your brain to kind of focus on something else, and then revisit it and then see um, if that works. You know,
Mm.
as weird as that sounds, I always feel like, yeah, just leaving it and coming back to it is always worked for me, um, rather than try to fight it. I never try to fight it. Try and never,
Mm.
because you'll never get anywhere. You're just sometimes making it worse, and then you're just going to down spiral down this like negative hole of like, gosh, why isn't this working? I'm beating this thing to death for hours, and it just still isn't sounding good. So you just get up, turn everything off that night, maybe just sleep on it for a night, come back to it the next day with a fresh mind, grab some coffee, sit in there, and be like, okay, let me analyze this now that I'm not in that frustrated state of mind where I had all these negative thoughts and nothing was working out, and see if I can fix this and make this a better thing. And I would say 9 times out of 10, you're going to get somewhere. You may not get there 100%, but you will get to a better place than where
Mm.
you were before.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I think that's going to go a long way for the listeners. And just to hear something like that from somebody who's been doing it for so long,
Sure.
it means a lot, because I think a lot of times you have these kids sitting in their basement studios, or, their mom's basement, just trying to figure this stuff out. And sometimes they think that they're the only ones going through it because they're not part of a community, right? And it's a lonely
Yeah.
road when you're frustrated. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
um,
true. Yes.
yeah.
It's very true.
So Yeah, I think yeah, that concludes the interview. And once again, thank you very much for doing this. You've been
Yes,
so great,
absolutely.
so generous.